Beyond Light has changed the Crucible in a big way. You know it, I know it. But how? Yes, you can freeze people now, that goes without saying. But there's something more fundamental than that. Weapon tuning is one thing, but having to play differently is another thing entirely. Stasis has introduced doubt on a new level to the common Crucible player. No more can you wildly aggress someone unless you're absolutely and 100% committed to an aggressive play. Unless you have supreme clarity and foresight into how an engagement plays out, aggression is not the default option anymore. And how do we even begin to talk about the meta with respect to weapons when it can all be over in the flash of a shatter dive? Has Stasis really flipped the script to a point where we're playing with our abilities first and our guns second? Well, no. As ever, the answer is a little bit of this, a dash of that, and a whole lot of nuance holding it all in place. So go make a cup of tea. Let's talk about it. My name is Ascendant Nomad, and I'm your Crucible Doctor. Beyond Light has brought with it a huge change to the way the average engagement feels in the Crucible. Now, there's been some pretty good weapon tuning that has brought with it the most balanced primary metagame we've seen in some time. But the headline act of Beyond Light has undoubtedly been the introduction of Stasis, which is slowly but surely beginning to be understood, expanded upon, and mastered. Stasis alone has brought something to Destiny that we didn't have before. An absolute, no prisoners taken way to shut down overly aggressive players. Gone are the days of freely holding W for a kill, because becoming frozen is not just a likelihood, it's all but a certainty with the way Stasis is currently tuned, and how popular it has become amongst the general population. With aggressive play dulled significantly, we're seeing a lot of players naturally and unconsciously shift to longer range options. In particular, Stasis has breathed new life into scout rifles, 390 pulse rifles, and 120 RPM hand cannons. On paper, these archetypes differ wildly, and there shouldn't be much overlap. There should be clear winners and losers. But in this new Crucible landscape, there's a healthy amount of overlap. There's a very specific reason for this, and it has to do with engagement ranges. But before we dive into talking about said ranges, I do want to talk about the weapon tuning that was performed and how Stasis has enhanced the natural shift in gameplay that came with that tuning. The meta for much of Destiny 2's third year was simple: 150 RPM hand cannons, 600 RPM auto rifles, aggressive frame shotguns, and sniper rifles. But 3 of these 4 have been weakened, and 1 has to deal with the darkness. Good snipers will contend that they still feel plenty strong, and on the whole I would have to agree with them, without going too much in depth. But it's the demotion of 150s down to 140s that has been the single biggest influence on the overall metagame. 150 RPM hand cannons became the standard for good reason. They offered high burst damage that you could use with cover, as well as offering a lot of versatility in aggressive situations thanks to the fire rate and the low zoom sights. With the Icarus mod on, they were more often accurate in the air than not. This led to them becoming the standard for high level players in high stakes activities like Legend Comp and Trials of Osiris, as well as the sweat scene. The trouble is they completely invalidated 140 RPMs altogether. 140s in the previous sandbox offered similar versatility and strength and demanded a near identical playstyle, but were always outmatched thanks to a worse time to kill. 0.07 seconds longer, to be precise. When Bungie consolidated the 150s into 140s, they also consolidated the standard time to kill of the Crucible. We went from a 0.8 time to kill experience to a 0.87 time to kill experience. And this makes it an awful lot closer to the unbelievably vast majority of weapon archetypes in the Crucible. 600 RPM auto rifles also got tuned and went down from a 0.7 optimal time to kill to a 0.8. That's still faster than most archetypes, but that extra bullet required to kill, combined with tracking enemies through their various movements, makes the archetype feel a little more difficult to master now. The trade-off with autos has always been requiring you to be constantly on target as opposed to peek shooting through cover, and now it's become the right amount of harder, in my opinion, to get those kills. With all that being said, because these guns have slower optimal time to kill values and even lower real-world time to kill values, a whole host of other archetypes can now claim to be competitive. We have 390 RPM pulse rifles, which have a 0.93 second optimal time to kill. Rapid-fire scout rifles at 260 RPM also have a 0.93 time to kill, and an aim assist buff that feels amazing right now in the Crucible. 120 and 180 RPM hand cannons kill in 1.0 seconds. The gap between fast and slow has been shrunk, and the outliers demand more of you whilst accentuating the trade-offs. As an example, high-impact pulses like Cold Denial and No Time to Explain are the time to kill champions with their 2 bursts killing in 0.67 seconds, but you give up any sort of aerial ability and aggressive positioning is generally a no-go. I believe the distinction now for this meta is not in terms of time to kill. Though there are still very much winners and losers in this respect, the question shifts to situations, maps, and playstyles. And this is exacerbated by the addition of Stasis. As I said in the introduction, Stasis has sown doubt into the mind of the average Crucible player. Close range play was always dictated by whomever had the stones to pull off the first aggressive move well. Now, even if you're on the receiving end of a Mark III Dune Marcher Titan, you have Stasis on your side. As Kamicakes explained in his video, there's only 2 approaches to Stasis: full send or play back. Full send is and will continue to be the most gratifying, high skill ceiling playstyle because of its high risk and high reward. But the skill floor required to execute this just became a lot higher. There's no pace variation with aggressive play now, due to the power of Stasis and how it can freeze you at a moment's hesitation. It's either hold W all the way, or don't even bother. Because of this, I think that only above average players can and will execute that full send playstyle, but even they will be thinking twice against a Stasis team that knows how to defend well against it. The worst feeling in this current sandbox is being frozen, as it removes your agency from proceedings and is in most cases a guaranteed death sentence. Given the choice of taking longer and potentially having to draw out an engagement in trials, versus flying in and immediately getting knocked out, leaving my team a man short, I'll take the longer fights any day. And I have a feeling you're going to want to do the same. Which leads us back to our specific reason for the overlap in the different weapons that can work: engagement ranges. What is an engagement range? It's in the name. It's the range at which you engage someone in a firefight. Engagement ranges implies multiple ranges. I chose range as a determining characteristic here because damage fall off is what affects your gun's ability to kill depending on your distance to the target. As such, different weapons have different engagement ranges and operate within a defined range better than others. This is not a new concept at all. We know shotguns are great for point blank, sidearms and SMGs are for a little further out. Then 720 auto rifles have a shout, and then we have everything else spearheaded by 140 RPM hand cannons. The reason I'm bringing it up now and giving it a nice makeover is because if you're going to play distance, you best well figure out just how exactly far out you want to play most of the time. I said this in our 120 RPM hand cannon video, but empirically, I feel most Crucible fights happen in the 15 to 40 meter range. With similar time to kill primaries across the board, and the smarter play to stay back, use your cover more, and not rush in blindly, the floodgates are now open for many archetypes to be considered competitive or even meta. The ones that will rise to the top are the ones that work for the people using the most effective playstyles. So deciding what's meta for you will depend heavily on the range you want to play at. But like we said before, there are still winners and losers. Let's talk about them, but in the context of range. The short range meta can be defined as the 0 to 15 meter range, where the player must close the gap to the opponent to secure the kill. I consider it a pretty open and shut case. It's shotguns. It will likely always be shotguns. Precision slugs and aggressive frames are one-hit kill options that work remarkably well. Shout out to Heritage in particular, the Raid shotgun, for feeling really crispy in PvP. To me at least. I prefer precision slugs for their added range benefits and high skill ceiling, making them really satisfying to use when done right. Sidearms like Breachlight, High Albedo and Last Hope are excellent surprise options as an alternative, whilst SMGs like the 7 Seraph VY7, Friction Fire and the Icolos SMG offer versatility and solidity with their effectiveness in the air and their competitive perk pools. The mid-range can be classified as being the 16 to 30 meter range, with a lot of engagements happening in that sweet 20 to 25 meter range. And in that range alone, it's very hard to look past 140s, especially Ace of Spades, and Thorn. But when you move past the hand cannon sweet spot, things get really, really complicated. Currently there are 2 pulse rifles that are the talk of the town, and it's Hail and Confusion, a 390 RPM from Empire Hunts, and Stars and Shadow, the Crucible 340 RPM. The 340 archetype wins in pure time to kill, but if those shots aren't perfect, you're going to be subject to a duel that you may very well lose. A lot can happen in between those bursts. 390s offer a solid middle ground between outright lethality and sustained pressure, making it a better option for teamwork. Scout rifles, in particular the rapid fire archetype, may also have a spot in this meta for the mid-range. They received a rather sizable aim assist buff of up to 15% in certain situations, and the net result is that they feel really good now. The extra stickiness makes it feel a little better to me than a 390 RPM pulse rifle with an identical optimal time to kill. I've been having a blast with my trusty, the new Raid Scout rifle. It just feels right. 120 RPM hand cannons are the new kids on the block, and if you haven't seen my video on them already, do go check it out. They are monsters that can encompass the entire mid-range and beyond, thanks to their low zoom sights and very aggressive tuning. When it comes to distances over 40 meters, it's hard to look past snipers. In particular, Adored is the de facto king right now. It's easy to get and it performs really rather well in all situations. Snapshot Killing Wind is nothing to scoff at either. Cloud Strike is also a viable option with its ridiculous AoE damage, though the 50 zoom is not for everyone. Succession is the sniper I want to chase in particular because it's a 72 RPM with a remarkably interesting loot pool. That being said, those scout rifle buffs did apply to 150s, 180s and 200s as well, and it's very hard to ignore them for long range options. In year 3 this was always the case as well, but in year 4 they are just so much easier to use and much more consistent from distance. They really do feel like a class in their own. Mida Multitool, Nightwatch, Transfiguration and Jade Rabbit all felt good in my limited testing, but you can still be shot through flinch, which makes it hard to recommend them outright over snipers. You see how many different archetypes and situations I just talked about? At this point in time, in week 3 of Beyond Light, the bottom line is I can't give you a straight answer. Like I said before, we're starting to see a slow shift towards longer range options as a result of Stasis. High impact pulse rifles are the time to kill champion, so I expect them to become commonplace. But it's really not that simple. Mid-range options like Ace of Spades are still plenty strong, and synergize rather well with Whisper of Hedrons and Charge with Light, resulting in builds that allow you to 2-tap easily. It depends entirely on the engagement range and the situation that you find yourself at. Whichever gun is versatile enough to suit your playstyle in a variety of different settings is the gun for you. For most, that will continue to be 140 RPM hand cannons. For others, a switch to high impact pulse rifles is the move. And then there's weirdos like me that love the idea of maining a rapid fire scout rifle simply because they feel really nice. If you're someone who defines the meta by pure time to kill values alone, then there is no contest. 340 RPM pulse rifles are the new meta. There's your answer. For everyone else though, the weapon tuning in this sandbox is one of the most balanced there's been in a very long time. Everything, and I mean everything, has its place. I am interested to see how this develops over time. Maybe in a few weeks I'll revisit this topic with more concrete data and experiences. But for now, I'll see you in trials with my trustee and chaperone. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, you know what to do. I'm Ascendant Nomad, and I'm your Crucible Doctor. Cheers.